Hey guys, it's January, April 5th, 6th, and Civil Rights Movement.
April Fool.
My name is Lauren.
April 5th.
Thanks for subscribing. Today we're going to be unboxing a couple of prom tickets. So let's get right into it. Oh, hold on, be right back. Gonna go get my cutter tool.
Okay.
Doing an unboxing.
I would assume you were getting prom tickets, and that's why
Yeah.
you're running slightly behind today. All
Yes.
right.
Can I take that during 8th today?
That would be awesome if you would take it to the meeting today.
Okay.
Okay, let me get it squared away. All right. So when we look at the civil rights movement and the modern civil rights era, then the historians, a vast majority of them, look at this as being from 1950 until 1968. Okay. They argue that that is the time period of the civil rights movement.
I left all my other stuff in the lunchroom. Can I go get
I just got my tickets to
I got prom tickets! Woohoo! I'm going to prom. Okay, but if we really look at this civil rights movement, does the civil rights movement begin in 1950?
No.
Okay, so what would you argue? What is the starting period date case of which it begins?
No.
Periodization, right? Argumentation.
The 14th Amendment.
With the passage of the 14th Amendment, just the 14th Amendment,
And the 13th and the 15th.
and the 13th, and the 15th,
And the 19th.
which is freedom, I'm a citizen, I can vote, right? Okay? And this is in Reconstruction, so it's 1867. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure on the specific date that they were passing. Sorry, that was not great. But, okay, so that's when it starts. Anybody have a different time in which they're arguing that it starts? Earlier, after? Okay? Earlier. When? Or why earlier? With whom? Sorry. I caught you mid thought. I have no books.
Like slavery was a bad time when people were always random letters. I don't know.
Okay, so like 1600s, basically since the start of slavery, you had people arguing that it needed to end.
That's pretty much
Oh,
what
okay, I get it now. I didn't get
But
what
are we
that
talking about like civil rights movement in America or
In the United States.
Oh dang, I was gonna
I was
argue.
gonna say the first time someone was ever oppressed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was
but
gonna
that doesn't
say
really work if we're talking about just the United States, right? Okay, so
Egypt 400 AD.
Yeah,
Moses
yeah,
leads the Jews out of
480.
slavery.
Okay, Clifford.
1620, because the Puritans fought for the right to wear belt buckles.
Okay. Okay, so 1620, because the Puritans and belt buckles. We could go 1863 with what occurs January 1st, 1863, or goes into effect January 1st, 1863. Yeah, the Emancipation Proclamation, right? So we could argue that it occurs there. We could argue with the passage of the Reconstruction movement. We could argue that it really begins in, this is actually must be earlier, 65 maybe. In 1866, we see the passage of the Voting Rights Act. In 1877, we see the passage of the first Civil Rights Act, right? So we're talking about civil rights, right? So 1867, doesn't that work as a date for the beginning of the civil rights movement? So why is it then that we say that the civil rights movement began in 1950?
Because that was the first time it was really effective and became popular.
Okay, so that's when it's effective, when it becomes popular, or maybe more widestream, well-known. Okay, so what occurs then from 1877 until 1965, when we have the passage of the next Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act under Lyndon Baines Johnson's, right? This is the other Andrew Johnson, sorry, Andrew wasn't coming to my brain, but, right? So what happens to prevent African Americans from really garnering rights between here and here almost 100 years later? Case.
There were some wars that people were more worried about.
Okay, so we've got World War I, right? Okay, and we have World War II. So are African Americans during World War I and World War II just being like, hey, I'm here, not doing anything? Okay. No, right?
TV was a thing.
Here?
Yeah. Because it wasn't before, you know, so they could see it and they'd be like, wow, those are people too. I'm just like those
And it
people.
was black and white, and they realized that they needed both equally to get the picture.
Maybe. I don't know.
That was so sweet.
There's also Jim Crow.
Okay, yeah, from here until really even here, we have Jim Crow and the Black Codes. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't legislation that's put in place between here and here, or things that don't happen between there and there, that try to push us down that civil rights movement. If you remember in the early, late 1800s, early 1900s, we have Booker T. Washington, right? We have W.E.B. Du Bois, okay, that are arguing for legislative change. We have Ida B. Wells, who's arguing for what? Yeah, to stop lynching, okay, because lynchings are bad. Max, heads up. Okay, lynchings are bad, right? So we have people in there, even within this 1877, we have the Civil Rights Act. But you've got things that actually push us more back this direction than forward along that civil rights legislation, despite what the works that these individuals are doing. For example, in 1896, we have a landmark Supreme Court decision. What's it called?
Plessy v. Ferguson.
Which says what? Separate but equal, right? Establishes the idea that we can segregate based on race as long as the facilities remain equal. Now, it's not just for blacks, although it's mostly applied for blacks, okay? But it's not just blacks, it applied to all the races. So if you were in California, it could be segregated based on whether you were of Asian descent. Does that make sense or not? So it's not just one or the other. But there's something very key that happens, but basically between this time frame and this time frame that prevent these things growing forward, even though in here we have the creation of the NAACP. We have the creation of groups that are trying to push this forward. In World War I, we have African Americans going off and fighting for our country, and then coming back with Randolph basically arguing that, hey, we need to push for greater equality. During the Great Depression, we have FDR, largely pushed on by his wife, Eleanor, who is desegregating the defense industry. Right? So we have some things. During World War II, we had this campaign. Do you remember what it was called? The Double V. Oh. Which was what? What was the Double V campaign?
Liberty overseas and at home.
Yeah, victory overseas and at home. Democracy in both places, right? And that if we fought over in Europe, then we would be able to get some of that same democracy here. But that was also, we thought that was going to happen here. And it didn't. Well, here's why. Because here to here, there's this thing that gets in the way. People, right? The legislative body, including our Supreme Court, largely pushes us back in time rather than pushing us forward. Even you have FDR who moves us forward, but yet at the same time Truman moves us back. So 1950 then becomes kind of this time frame and it's like, well, how are we going to push this forward? Now, and the other thing too that happens in here under FDR in 1940 is the establishment of CORE, or the Congress of Racial Equality, okay? So we see, right, some of this establishment of this, but again, people, right? People are what prevent us from moving forward because largely the United States is still racist, right? We don't believe in the equality of African Americans. And the hardest thing to change are people. The easiest thing to change is laws. You can change a law. I could change a law tomorrow. It doesn't mean I'm going to change anybody's ideas or anybody's thoughts about what's going to change or how that law is going to be shaped. So why do historians pick this year, 1950? Of all years, right? Why 1950? Any thoughts, guesses? Beyond TV, because TVs are out before 1950.
People started changing.
Okay, well, but why? What about people changed?
Yeah, he got that far.
My main man, Martin Luther King Jr. was around.
Yeah,
That's
but
the most
this
important thing.
dude, Avril Randolph, is more around prior to that. And honestly, King doesn't write the letters from the Birmingham jail until much later. Brown v. Board is in 54, so it's not Brown versus the Board of Education.
It was a lot of like just the younger generation realizing how awful it was, and they were protesting and stuff like that.
Okay?
And marches.
So protests and marches begin there.
Yeah.
Okay?
Selma.
Not
It's a
yet.
movie.
Okay.
Almost.
All right, but there's not actually a whole lot that occurs in 1950. Here's the biggest thing that occurs in 1950 to help spur on some of that change. Is in 1950, we see a midterm election, okay, that replaces the Republican majority in Congress with a Democratic majority. Now, the Democratic Party, after FDR, is a party that it has a tendency to be much more liberal than conservative, right? They like to see more of that social reform. So in 1950, you see Congress become Democratic, and then in 1952, a new dude is elected to the office of the White House. Now, he doesn't take in until January 20th of 1953, but that dude's name is Eisenhower. Thank you. Okay? Eisenhower. Why does this person matter?
He was from an army background, and the army had been unsegregated.
The army isn't fully desegregated at the time of World War II, but you're right, he was from a military background. What does it mean to fight alongside some other dude?
It's
Camaraderie.
a bond, a brotherhood.
Yeah, so what if that dude's black?
It's still a bond.
It's
brotherhood.
still a bond, it's still a brotherhood, right? If that
It's
dude
not
prevents
real.
you from dying,
Yeah.
it's still a bond, it's still a brotherhood. Now, on the other hand, if that dude gets you shot, maybe not so much, right? Okay?
Well,
I don't remember, I was talking to another teacher, and I don't remember who it was, but they said that their grandfather actually ran in the Pacific, one of the flamethrowers, and that they actually, because of that, because you're carrying this flamethrower, you couldn't actually carry a gun also other than your sidearm, your pistol. You didn't have like a rifle. And so they actually sent somebody with you that was your rifleman. Well, his particular rifleman was an African American, and when they got into some of the heat of things, his rifleman took off running in the other direction. So until the day he died, he was not a fan of African Americans as a direct result of that. But the same conversely can be true, right? That it can change your ideas about people. Something else very crucial happens in 1953. In 1953, we see the election of, or the appointment, the appointment of a new Supreme Court justice. As president, Eisenhower has not only the right, but the responsibility to appoint chief justices, much as Obama has the right and responsibility to appoint a new chief justice, right? Has to be approved, though, by whom?
Mitch McConnell.
Congress, okay? Okay? Congress. Well, unlike for Obama, right, this is synthesis comparing two different time periods, right, but a similar theme. Unlike Obama, who does not have a same party in Congress, Eisenhower does. So when Eisenhower appoints this new Supreme Court justice, people are going to be okay with his appointment of that new Supreme Court Chief Justice. And he just happens to appoint somebody who happens to be less conservative than any of the other justices. That dude's name is?
Edward.
No. It does start with an E though. His first name.
Earl
Pomeroy.
Warren. Earl Warren. Earl Warren. Earl
Okay?
Warren.
Yes, Chief Justice Earl Warren. Okay? And then that will begin to reshape the legal system within the United States. Now that doesn't mean that there wasn't other things going on, right? We talked about that there are other parts of civil rights legislation that are key to this, that are pushing us into that momentum and beginning that change. CORE then, although created, 42, it becomes an active within this movement, within this 1950 to 1968, and it's largely because of them that we will see a lot of these landmark cases be brought to the forefront in front of and onto this national stage. Now here's the reality of this, right? We have 1950 to 1968. Other than the election of Eisenhower and the election of Warren, the next big event that occurs is in 1954. That event occurs because the NAACP will file suit on behalf of a third grade little girl by the name of Linda Brown. Now, Linda Brown actually had to walk across the railroad tracks and additionally had to walk to then from there catch a bus to be able to attend a black school. So she had to travel a much greater distance to get to school than really she should have had to, okay? When the reality of it was that there was a white school, the black school was like 6 blocks away from her home, which included the going across railroad tracks and then riding the bus. But the white school was a mere 4 blocks from her home. Her parents were well off. And they had the ability for her to go to this white school, so they tried to enroll her in the white school. And they're denied based on the fact that schools were segregated, okay? And that as a result of Plessy v. Ferguson, that they could be separate but equal. Well, the NAACP sues because they argued that her not being able to attend the school that was closest to her home was a violation of her civil rights, and it was a violation of her ability through the due process of the law. Okay, so goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court now has to rule on actually whether or not it's a violation of that Equal Protection Clause under the 14th Amendment, right? That's what the Supreme Court does. It's not like, okay, well, should she go to the school or not? They have to rule on the constitutionality of a law. So they're ruling on the constitutionality of Plessy v. Ferguson on the basis of whether or not it provides equal protection under the 14th Amendment as is required. Does that make sense? She would have that guarantee. Now there were others, by the way, that had previously tried to enroll in white schools. It's not like all of a sudden this Linda Brown kid was like some special gift that everybody was like, we need to make sure Linda Brown gets to the white school because it's a better school. But much like Rosa Parks later, Linda Brown fit the mold that the NAACP needed her and her family to fit. They were upper middle class. Okay? They were good, upstanding citizens. They both were, their father was employed in a lower level but still white collar work. Mom was a stay-at-home mom. They were normal attendants, or they were greater participants in church, right? So they were like, if you want to handpick somebody to be your test subject, they're the key individuals to pick for your test subject, right? For this to go through. Now, Warren then had been appointed to this dominant conservative court. But Warren is not a conservative justice. And by being appointed, he's able to tip the balance from a conservative Supreme Court to a more liberal Supreme Court. And so, as a result of the case that is argued by Thurgood Marshall, okay, Justice Warren, writing the majority opinion, argued that separation but equal violated that 14th Amendment because he argued that the separate facilities were inherently unequal. In other words, I could have two desks, right? Desk, desk. Two separate desks, two separate schools. But the reality of it is this: since the foundations of our school systems, how do we pay for school?
Taxpayer
Taxes.
dollars.
Be more specific. What taxes pay for your schools?
Income tax. Property taxes?
Property taxes. Property taxes, right? So if I live in a poor neighborhood, am I going to have a lot of money to help build myself a nice desk, a nice school? No, because I'm not getting it from property taxes, right? And so in poor black neighborhoods, they didn't have that ability to do so. But in a white neighborhood, where families are more gainfully employed, more likely to be white-collar workers than blue-collar workers, okay? Less likely to be domestic servants, are they going to have higher property taxes? Yeah, because more of them are going to simply own property, own a home.
What about lower income white neighborhoods? Would they have the same problems as black neighborhoods?
Yes, the schools don't have the same amount of funding. However,
Could they still go to
they could go to a different school, and there wouldn't be any prevention of them open enrolling into some other school. For example, today in Minnesota, you can open enroll into any school in Minnesota that you want to, whether it's in your district or not. Fargo, West Fargo, you can open enroll into any school that you want. If Case wanted to, he could open enroll into Davies, even if he lives in South's district. Or any of you could open enroll into South, even though you live in Davies district.
I do that. I
Okay.
live in West Fargo.
You live in West Fargo and you open enroll into the Davies School District. You have that ability to do so. Now, let's say, Cole, you were getting in a lot of trouble. We could kick you back to your school district and tell you to go back to where you're supposed to be attending school. And that's even within a different school district, because Fargo Public Schools and West Fargo Public Schools are two separate school districts. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, it would be a little bit different, let's say, if you were out in Castleton or something like that, and you would not be able to open enroll Minnesota from North Dakota or vice versa. Okay, you have to be in that state. But it comes predominantly from property taxes. She couldn't do that, despite the fact that the white school was closer and better. But because of property taxes, because of funding for schools, those African American schools are going to be less equal, inherently by their pure nature. And so as a result of that, he says that Plessy v. Ferguson is to be gone away with, right? No more Plessy v. Ferguson. It's illegal. Okay. So what? Separate but equal is illegal. So what? The Supreme Court has ruled you can't do that.
So now, open enroll in a white school.
Okay, so you're Linda Brown. You can now open enroll in a white school, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now does every student have to try to open enroll in that white school? Or those white schools?
I mean, I guess you don't have to if you don't want to.
What if they try to prevent her from opening and enrolling?
It's illegal.
Yeah? So?
So you sue again.
Here's what I'm getting at. Brown v. Board is considered a landmark case, right? Because it overturns Plessy v. Ferguson. But there's nothing in the case, in the opinion that is written, that says anything about ending segregation, that calls for integration whatsoever at all. Does that make sense? There's nothing in there. It just says that it's a violation of her due process rights. That's it. So in 1955, they have to give a second ruling, a second opinion about Brown. It's called the Brown 2. And we forget about this in history. But this one is more important in ways than the first Brown decision. Because in it, it says that schools need to be integrated with all deliberate speed. Now that too, in and of itself, has problems, right? Because what the heck does it mean with all deliberate speed? If you're Governor Falbus, with all deliberate speed, means I'm going to take my sweet time integrating public schools, right? Okay, and we'll pick up with that tomorrow. Cole, if you'll push the stop button.